Welcome to the program, everyone. I'm Amarachi Ubani in Lagos. History was made today when the world's richest man, Jeff Bezos, today soared about 66.5 miles above the Texas desert aboard his company, Blue Origin's New Shepard launch vehicle, and returned safely to Earth. He described it as the best day ever when the capsule touched down, kicking up a cloud on the desert floor. The 57-year-old billionaire was joined by 3 crewmates for a trip to the edge of space, lasting about 10 minutes and 20 seconds. Pioneering female aviator Wally Funk was, and recent high school graduate, 18-year-old Oliver Damon, became the oldest and youngest people to reach space. Now, just a while ago, the New Shepard spacecraft ignited its BE-3 engines for a liftoff from the Blue Nile launch site at one facility about 20 miles outside the rural town of Van Horn, flying about 66.5 miles above the planet's surface. There were generally clear skies with a few patchy clouds on a cool morning for the launch. The New Shepard was designed to hurtle at speeds upwards of 2,200 miles per hour to an altitude beyond the so-called Kármán line at 62 miles set by an international aeronautics body as defining the boundary between Earth's atmosphere and space. After the capsule separated from the booster, the crew was due to have unbuckled for a few minutes of weightlessness. Then the capsule returned to Earth under parachutes using a last-minute retro thrust system that expelled a pillow of air for a soft landing in the Texas desert. The mission was part of a fiercely competitive battle between Bezos' Blue Origin and fellow billionaire Richard Branson's Virgin Galactic to tap a potentially lucrative space tourism market. A Swiss bank estimates will be worth $3 billion annually in a decade. Branson got to space first, but Bezos was due to fly higher, 62 miles for Blue Origin compared to 53 miles for Virgin Galactic, in what experts call the world's first unpiloted space flight with an all-civilian crew. It represents Blue Origin's first crewed flight to space.
Let's go to the moon. Who wants to go to the moon with me? I'm in. Definitely in. Don't tell Lisa. All right.
Some of the moments experienced earlier this afternoon. Our correspondent in Washington, Maria Bird, monitored the historic event for us. She joins us now. Maria, I know that there was a lot of euphoria for families and relatives of the now civilian astronauts watching the rocket launch in Texas. But was that excitement also felt across the United States?
The excitement was definitely felt across the United States. You've seen all throughout the week, space and Earth exploration shows. And I think a lot of the young people here in the U.S. have been extremely excited about this and what this will mean for the future. There's great prospects, but they believe, this will become just like someone rides on a plane. They will be able to buy a ticket to actually head up to space, and it will become, the everyday Americans' potential possibility to be able to actually make it to space, just as they would buy a plane ticket today. That will be an opportunity for many Americans. It will become not just a billionaire's opportunity, but even for those who are your everyday individuals in the U.S.
So if you have $250,000 at least, you can pay for a ticket. But the end goal here, as you say, of course, is space tourism. How much of an impact, economic impact that is, would it have on the United States?
I think the economic impact would be one that would have somewhat, especially for areas as we saw that part of Texas that was very desolate, extremely desert-like land. And so much of the underdeveloped areas in the U.S. This could potentially be an area of potential growth for the U.S. But I think more than anything, it will be an opportunity to expand the knowledge of science and to really innovate and to strengthen, I think, the interest of science for young people and for Americans as a whole. So it will really do something, I think, to what has been a lagging area of interest, which is science, technology, engineering, and math in the U.S.
So Elon Musk is also planning to go to space. Has he made up his mind when this trip takes place?
I think that he is still making sure, as we know, there was a tight race here, to see who made it first. They've obviously, the three individuals that have made or that are on their way to space have been very supportive of one another. So I think at this time, he's going to ensure that he has all the safety precautions in place to make sure that when he does hit the flight, but I would not be surprised if we're not seeing another visit to space within the next 6 months.
Well, Maria, if Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos and Richard Branson can all go to space, then anyone with a lot of money can make it to space. Thanks again for joining us.
Yeah. Thank you for having me.
To the coronavirus pandemic now, fully jabbed travelers returning from France to England and Wales are being asked to quarantine to stop the spread of cases of the Beta variant of coronavirus, first identified in South Africa. The UK government says the precautionary measure is to protect the gains made in the UK's vaccination programme after concerns that existing COVID jabs may not work as well against the variant. The Beta variant, also known as 501v2 or B1351, has some significant genetic changes that experts are studying. All viruses, including the one that causes COVID-19, constantly mutate into new versions or variants. Here's a global update.
In other parts of Europe, France's health minister announced today that France recorded 18,000 new cases in the country in a day, saying they'd never seen this before. He told Parliament today that he'd spoken of the risk of reaching 15,000 to 20,000 cases per day at the end of the month of July, and yesterday there were 18,000 new infections in only 24 hours, meaning that the spread of the virus has increased by 150% over the week. According to the Prime Minister, 40 million people could have received their first jab at the end of July, but he says mobilization will go on so that the target can be reached at the end of the month. Taiwan has approved emergency use and production of Vaccine Biologics Corporation's COVID-19 vaccine candidate, a major steel in the island's plans to develop its own vaccine to protect against the coronavirus. The vaccine candidate has yet to finish clinical trials and no efficacy data is available. But Taiwan's health ministry says studies so far have shown that antibodies created by the shot have been no worse than those created by AstraZeneca's vaccine. 2 of Australia's 6 states have been put under lockdown today as COVID-19 Delta variant spreads, with Victoria extending its lockdown to 7 days and South Australia announcing a week-long lockdown, while Sydney was in a 5-week lockdown. Australia's most populous state, New South Wales, of which Sydney is the capital, is battling the largest outbreak with total cases exceeding 1,400. Finally, millions of Muslims in Indonesia today celebrated a subdued Eid al-Adha, one of the most important Islamic festivals, as the president pledged that tighter coronavirus restrictions will remain in place until infections dropped. Cases in Indonesia are currently among the highest in the world due to the rapid spread of the Delta variant, in spite of the imposition since early this month of the strictest mobility restrictions so far during the pandemic.
As England moved to the final stage of the lifting COVID-19 restrictions on Monday in what has been dubbed Freedom Day, despite a surge in daily cases, local residents are voicing their concerns about it. July 19 was the date that the British government sought to end all legal, social and economic restrictions imposed to mitigate the effects of the COVID-19 epidemic. Medical experts are, however, reminding the public to exercise caution, including a famous epidemiologist and scientific advisor to the British government, Neil Ferguson, who says that it is expected that the number of new infections in a single day will rocket up to 200,000 in the UK as restrictions are eased and the number of daily newly hospitalized cases may reach 2,000 patients. Local residents, we said, are concerned about the decision to lift restrictions. Many are trying to remind others to be careful because the pandemic is still raging across the country. Joining us now is Channels Television's correspondent in London, Ijoma Onyato. Ijoma, it's been a day since the lifting of those restrictions. A lot of Britons were excited about it yesterday. They called it Freedom Day, but it's only freedom amidst some conditions, right?
Yeah, thanks, Amara. Thanks a lot. It's a very interesting time to be in the UK. Yeah, a lot of people were happy yesterday. Some people were rejoicing that they wouldn't have to wear their masks on mandatorily anymore. But then you did have the category of people who felt with the health minister testing positive, even though he's been double jabbed, then how joyous a day is it really? Usually when you get into the UK and you have to isolate, as I've had to do, you'd find that the NHS app would say, would ping you if you needed to isolate, etc. But then yesterday was really different because a lot of the pings that came yesterday were to say that most of the legal restrictions have been dropped, and that was really different for people who usually the ping doesn't mean that exactly. And then going out, it's funny because people say old habits die hard, but new habits die hard as well. People still do have their masks on. I mean, a couple of people were kind of just holding their masks up, rejoicing that they didn't have to wear them anymore. But the reality is that the restrictions may have been dropped, but the virus is still raging, even as you see the figures that are coming in from here, Marachi.
Yeah, and those people who are still wearing their masks and still observing those restrictions probably belong to those who are concerned about the lifting of restrictions and concerned about infection rates going up. But speaking of vaccines, because the UK has prided itself with vaccinating millions of people, which is the reason why they're lifting these restrictions. You got your first jab yesterday. Talk to us about it, what it was like, and what the message from the NHS is as people begin enjoying the lifting of the sanctions and the restrictions.
Yeah, it was really interesting yesterday, Amarachi. I mean, I'm in Northwest London at the moment, so I went to a vaccination centre in Cricklewood, and it was as early as 7 a.m. You found that people were thronging the pop-up vaccination centres, not just to get vaccinated, but there was this feeling of, well, if I can travel and the restrictions say if I'm double jabbed and I'm coming back into the UK from an amber list country, I don't need to quarantine. So for some, that was the reason they were actually in queue. Many people were actually turned away because the NHS England is very strict about the 8 weeks at the minimum. So some people turned up with their vaccination cards reading 4 weeks, 5 weeks. And even though they were hopefully would-be holiday makers, they were very politely told that it was too soon for them to get the vaccine. Interestingly enough, a lot of them were citing the CDC in America, saying that in America you can have it within 4 weeks, but in England that is not the case. And a lot of them were not really amused by that. In terms of my personal experience, well, I did have quite a few symptoms in terms of the headache. It kind of felt like you have a bit of a dull malaria, that kind of thing. You feel a bit weak, but then again, you're up to hydrate, drink a lot of water, take paracetamol if you need to. But usually they want your body to fight it. So that's the whole idea, for you to build up your own immunity. I spoke to a doctor in a hospital in a particular ward. I mean, he was the ward, the person in charge of the ward there. And they're saying that people should be cautious. I mean, it's not hurrah. Everyone knows that at the end of the day, they're not saying if you're double vaccinated, then you can go off and just gather as you wish. But what he has said is still keep the protocols, do keep your mask on, not mandatorily now, but if you have to. That was me trying to be at the vaccine center. That's really like a pop-up bus that came up earlier on in the day. And like I said, Amarachi, very interesting that people are actually going there just to have that green passport to say that, yes, that you can travel and you have some sort of protection. But then, of course, when you look at it, it's not a perfect science. And as the doctor I spoke to said to me today, he's been double jabbed as well. But seeing what happened with the health minister, he was a little bit worried and is telling everyone out there to just still be careful, even if it is, a quote, a sort of freedom day, as they say in the UK.
Right, and you prepare for your second jab, and hopefully that goes better than your first. Ijoma, thank you for speaking with us, and do stay safe, of course, still.
Thank you.
Muslims around the world are today marking the Eid el-KABIR, or Eid el-Adha, depending on where you are in the world. A major Muslim holiday usually marked by communal prayers, large social gatherings, and for many, the slaughtering of livestock and giving meat to the needy. But as the coronavirus pandemic persists, concerns are growing over the Delta variant, thereby restricting celebrations today. Here in Nigeria, President Muhammadu Buhari joined other Muslim faithful in Daura, his hometown, in Katsina State, to celebrate the 2021 EL-KABIR. And in the country's commercial capital, Lagos, Muslims observed the festival despite the heavy downpour this morning.
Muslim faithful make their way to the Dodon Barracks prayer ground at Obalende, Ikoyi area of Lagos, observing COVID-19 protocols. Not minding the rainfall, they are determined to observe the EL-KABIR prayers despite the rain. The Deputy Governor of Lagos, Kadri Hamzat, Speaker of the House of Representatives, Femi Gbajabiamila, among the dignitaries observing the prayers at an event the Imam of Lagos Central Mosque re-echoes the essence of salvation.
It's very significant to each and every one of us as Muslims to fear Allah, to have the piety of Allah, to fulfill our promises, not only between us and our Maker alone. We make promises maybe where we are seeking for position of authorities and positions of authority and so on. So after getting those positions, are we anywhere to be found fulfilling our covenant with our people?
In the rain, prayers continued. Afterwards, a ram is sacrificed. The Deputy Governor gives his message at his residence, asking people to celebrate moderately.
Like we know, you don't have to do anything wrong in order to catch COVID-19. But the truth is, the number of admission in our isolation center is spiking up. So therefore, we all have to be very careful, celebrate moderately, and, within the family, not too much gatherings, comply with the COVID-19 protocols. And let's make sure that as much as we are happy, we don't want to end up unhappy by getting sick.
Speaker of the House of Representatives observes the same tradition at his home.
In the spirit that we're in today, let Nigerians continue to live in peace together. I am a proponent of unity of this country. I am not there yet where you talk about secession or division or people go their separate ways. I've always believed that God, Almighty God, in His wisdom, put this country together in spite of our differences for a reason. And I believe in the saying that united we stand, divided we fall.
One of the lessons of EL-KABIR is a demonstration of God's infinite mercy on mankind, and the Muslim faithfuls have been asked to imbibe this spirit.
Belgians today observed a minute of silence to mark a national day of mourning for the victims of the flooding which killed at least 31 people in the country. Belgian King Philippe and Queen Mathilde talked to families whose houses were flooded during the ceremony in Viviers, a town badly hit by the disaster. A country's southeast was hit by floods that left more than 37,000 homes without electricity. Belgian authorities say the supply of clean drinking water is also a major concern. 163 people are still missing or unreachable. The crisis center says water levels are falling and a huge cleanup operation is underway. Meanwhile, residents in Germany's flood-hit areas fear they could be left without access to power and drinking water for months. The cost of rebuilding infrastructure following floods in western Germany last week will be much higher, so says Chancellor Angela Merkel, than after previous floods. She said the government would discuss using cell broadcast flood warning systems in the future, responding to criticism that people in flood-hit areas were not sufficiently warned of the danger. Merkel and North Rhine-Westphalia Premier and CDU Chancellor candidate Armin Laschet traveled to Germany's flood zone for the second time today and visited the flood-ridden towns of Iversheim and Bad Monsterfein. With torrential rains and floods battering Europe, leaving more than 160 people dead, hundreds more injured, scientists are warning that extreme weather events are likely to be more common and there's need to cut greenhouse gas emissions. Although the World Meteorological Organization has soon said it is too soon to blame the floods and preceding heat wave on rising global temperatures, the organization says many single weather events may have shown to be made worse by global warming. The European Commission spokesperson for Climate Action and Energy, Tim McPhee, told Channel Television that the Fit for 55 plan, which aims to cut carbon emissions by 55% by 2030, has the protection of citizens from climate impact at the heart of it.
But I think the events which we talked about earlier, the tragic events of this last week, show what the impact of climate change are. And in Europe, in the last week, it has meant flooding, which has taken lives, but we also see extreme heat in Europe, also in North America, in Siberia, and around the world. And we know that brings challenges for people's health. It brings challenges for agriculture, for example. So I think people start to understand that the cost of not taking action is actually higher than the cost of this transition. Now, of course, we understand that there will be challenges for certain people, for vulnerable communities, for those with less financial resources, and also for European industry. And that's why we've put in place policies which we think will be fair. So, for example, we will generate extra revenues through emissions trading, so through putting a price on carbon. So companies that put polluting fuels on the market will have to pay, they will have to buy allowances for those fuels. And then we will take part of the revenues, and we will take 25% of the revenues actually, which come from fuel and from heat buildings and transport fuel. We will reinvest that money. We will put it in what we call a social climate fund, and that will help people to make the transition. So we've, from the start, been very clear that we need the financial resources to help them with the transition. We need to acknowledge, first of all, within Europe, that everybody has a different starting point. And then we also acknowledge that looking around the world and dealing with our partners. And again, we come back to the question of climate finance. We know that we have a commitment which is being made to the rest of the world, which we need to live up to. We know that Europe has investments that it can make, it has experiences that it can share. And we very much believe that if you don't take populations along with you, if you don't take the whole world along with you, you don't solve what is a global issue.
Mali's interim president, Assimi Goïta, got a close shave with death today after an attempted stabbing at a mosque in the capital, Bamako. Colonel Goïta was attending prayers to mark the Muslim festival of Eid-al-Adha at the Grand Mosque. Authorities say the attackers have been arrested and the president taken to safety. He is reportedly unharmed. Before last August's coup, the country was facing demonstrations over corruption and the Islamist insurgency the vast landlocked country faces. Colonel Goïta intervened again in May, replacing a transitional government and taking over as president. He promised to hand over to civilian rule as planned next year. Taking a look at the war in Afghanistan. As forces continue to fight the Taliban, rockets hit the Afghan capital today, landing near the residential palace during prayers for the Muslim festival. But President Ashraf Ghani and many others calmly continued praying at an outdoor gathering. 3 rockets landed outside the palace in Kabul. According to a spokesperson, there were no immediate reports of injuries. Taliban insurgents denied they were involved in the attack on the heavily fortified palace. Unlike some previous years, the Taliban have not officially declared a ceasefire for Eid religious holiday this week. Insecurity has been growing in Afghanistan in recent weeks, largely spurred by fighting in its provinces as US-led foreign troops complete their withdrawal and the Taliban launch major offensives, taking districts and border crossings. We're in the world today on this record-breaking note. Just as we started, Brazilian MMA fighter, this man has set the Guinness World Record on his 35th birthday. He's Cristiano Rodrigues Loreno. He took on the challenge to raise money for his niece, who was born last year with a severe heart disease. In 9 months of training, Loreno completed over 25,000 burpees. He says injury prevented him from setting an even higher record. such dedication. Thanks for watching. I'm Amarachi Ubani. Enjoy the rest of the holiday.